morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to On the Couch Again with me, Martin Coqueliffe. Today, my guest, to many of you, will need little introduction, if any. He's been the Vice President of the Spiritualist National Union. He's currently a Director on the NEC in charge of the education and exponents, which is doing his best to modernise and bring it into a more modern system. And he's also a tutor at the world-famous Arthur Findlay College. And my guest today is Minister Stephen Upton. So good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'm really pleased that you took this opportunity for us to interview, because you've got a vast knowledge and there's a particular subject you want to talk about today. But we'll come on to that in a moment. I don't know if you've watched any of the interviews, but we've been asking two standard questions. And the first one is, what brought you into this? And I think it's interesting that people know what walks of life we came from. And like myself, you came through the military. And when you say to people, oh, I was in the military and now I'm a minister in a religion, they look at you kind of, what changed? So what brought you into it, Steve? Sorry, Stephen. I know you look like Steve.
Yes, my name is Stephen. Martin. Yes. What brought me into spiritualism? I need to go back, actually. It's my first time coming in. And that was before I joined the Royal Air Force. Some people actually say the Royal Air Force is not really part of the armed forces, but we like to think we were. But I got to go back to October 1971, and I was still at school then. This was in Birmingham, in the Midlands, in England. And with two friends from school, I believe I was just 15, that's right, I was 15 at the time. And on a Wednesday evening at about 7:15, we were strolling down a street in King's Heath in Birmingham. And then we came across a building with a sign outside that said King's Heath Spiritualist Church. My two friends wanted to go in because on the notice board it said 7 o'clock, there was going to be an open circle starting. We had no idea what it was about, but they wanted to go in. And if memory serves me correctly, I wasn't that interested. But rather than go home on my own, I went in with them. I remember that evening very clearly. It was of mild interest. I wasn't saying I was completely bowled over by it or captured. It was of mild interest. I remember I had what I'd now think of as a clairvoyant experience, and I did speak about it and nobody accepted it or understood it. And over the next 2 years, I went back on an occasional basis. It was strange because my two friends who took me in, they never went back. A very strange situation, but I went back on a casual basis for about 2 years, maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. Gaining information, experience, but again, not hugely interesting. Again, it didn't really captivate me at that time. I left school the following year, still 15 when I left school. Got a temporary job whilst I was waiting to go in the Royal Air Force. And it was that period then. On joining the Royal Air Force, that took me away from going to the Spiritualist Church, because I moved areas about 3 or 4 times in fairly quick succession, doing various training programs, completed my training, and within a couple of months I was posted overseas because of the emergency in Cyprus in '74.
Yeah.
So there's a period there of about 2 years away from it with no involvement, never thought about it, to be honest. On being back in England, we're now about 1976, 77 time, back in England. It was really strange, actually, because I had no thoughts of going to a spiritualist church, but with two friends from the RAF, as opposed to two friends from school, we were in Nottingham, which was the nearest city to where we were based. We were looking for a metal detector shop. And in those days, we had public phone boxes with yellow pages in them. So I had a car and we were looking for this shop in Nottingham, and I pulled up. I said, I'm going to go and see if I can find it in the yellow pages in that phone box. When I got back to the car, my two friends said, look, over there, spiritualist church, they've always wanted to go to one. And I said, well, I've been before, and whilst I've got nothing against it, I wasn't that interested in it. They said, you've got the car, you've got to take us. We never did find the metal detector shop.
Yeah.
I did take them back. They went once and never went again. And I went week after week after week. And it was from that moment I decided to become a spiritualist.
Yeah.
I became increasingly involved. So in a sense, there was 2 occasions where, through no thought of my own, something drew me there.
Yes.
I joined a development circle there, opening up all these various faculties. And I never completed that development circle because I was posted overseas again for another 2.5 years back to Cyprus. I'd opened up all of these faculties, but I hadn't got to the class where we learned how to close them all down, which, as you and I now know, is actually very important.
Yes.
Now, combine that with the job I did in the RAF, and you can see why I was starting to have problems. I was an RAF police dog handler. And as a dog handler, my job was basically taking a dog for a walk every night. Me, the dog, I'd either walk around an airfield dispersal on my own all night, or a petrol supply depot, or a bomb dump, never meeting another living soul, just me and the dog wandering around in the dark. Your mind wanders, and I've learned how to open up all these psychic faculties, and I'm now starting to have very weird experiences at night. I'm hearing voices and there's no one there. I'm hearing half of conversations and not the other half. I'm starting to see things, and because I hadn't learned how to close them down.
Yeah.
When you wander around at night on your own for 6 hours, just you and your dog, your mind opens up and drifts, and you see things.
Yeah.
I remember lying on my back in the middle of the runway at an RAF base. Of course, the airfield was shut down. They weren't flying at night. Lying on my back, just looking up at the stars, because there was very little light pollution. So it's fabulous skies at night when there's no clouds. And it's like the same as staring into a crystal ball.
Yeah.
And the mind opens up and you see all sorts of fabulous things.
I'm sure there's going to be people trying that now.
Yeah. Incidentally, I've learned studying some ancient laws going back to the 16th century, and there used to be something called, not laws, illnesses, something called planets. People died from staring at the stars, apparently.
All right.
In the 15th and 16th century, it was called planets.
It probably sent them mad.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I thought it was sending me mad. Whilst I was in England prior to going back to that place, I met a medium called Bill Perkins. Sorry, Bill. Can't even pronounce his name properly. And he started taking me to services, not me doing them, watching him doing services. And I started sitting with him for various development practices. I was continuing to correspond with him whilst I was in the Middle East. And he was trying to help me by writing letters through correspondence. Letters in those days, email didn't exist, which wasn't terribly helpful. But eventually, in 1979, he said in July he was going to the Arthur Findlay College, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Would I like to go with him?" He explained what it was, and I thought, "Yeah, I'd like to go, but I can't. I'm in the Middle East, I can't get leave, and even if I could, I couldn't afford to fly back." Guess what happens? At very short notice, leave becomes available, and there's a flight coming back which I could go on for £5. All right, there's no seats. He's in the back of a Hercules, which is unheated, and the noise is horrendous, and it's going to take you about 6 hours instead of the usual 3 or 4. But for £5, who cares?
Yeah.
So I came back. I went to the Arthur Findlay College for the first time. And like I'm sure many of your viewers watching this who have been to the college, they'll remember their first time as a life-changing experience.
Yes.
And that was now nearly 41 years ago.
Yeah.
July 79. And here we are, 41 years later. From that first experience, I'm still going there.
Excellent. But now as a tutor, and I know today you've come on, you've given us a topic that you'd like to talk about,
yeah.
that you feel is one of your passions. I know trance mediumship is one of your passions, particularly in trance healing. Is a lot of your teachings in trance healing. But you said you'd like to talk about, is it trance mediumship or control mediumship? Now you've spiked my interest, and I'm sure when people hear us saying that, you know, the viewers see that introduction, it's going to spike their interest too. So tell us about that, why you want to talk about that in particular.
Yes, trance and control. And I'll just emphasize the word, sorry, I'm going to rephrase it, trance or control, not trance and control, trance or control. There's an awful lot of misunderstanding on these two words. The modern common use word is trance. I could sit here now and self-induce a trance state with no involvement with the spirit world, but in the context of what we're talking about, that wouldn't even be mediumship. It would be a self-induced altered state of consciousness, and we could call it trance, which it would be, and it'd be absolutely useless to the spirit world. Now, if I said to you, we're going to do a demonstration of communicating mediumship, you would understand precisely what the object of the exercise would be. Mediumship implies that it is some form of connection between our world and what the spiritualists we term the spirit world, and the purpose of it is to communicate with them. So the title tells you what it is.
Yeah.
If we're going to do another exercise, I said, let's do some healing mediumship. Again, the title clearly tells you what it is. The object of the exercise is to allow the spirit world to do healing through our mediumship. But if I said we're going to do trance mediumship, that is actually a very misleading title, because the object of the exercise isn't to be in trance. The object of the exercise is to allow someone from the spirit world to control the medium through their mind to do various things they can't do because they don't have a physical body. So the object of the exercise is control. Trance is not the object, and I'll explain why in a moment. That trance is the tool that enables the object. So, for example, as we said, they don't have a physical body. If they want to talk to us now, and they don't want to do it through the mind of a medium, because as we know, it's never a perfect form of communication. The mind gets things wrong in translation, in interpretation. They can do it in one of two ways. Through mental mediumship, through controlling a medium's mind to express their thoughts verbally through the medium, using the medium's vocal cords. Or physical mediumship, using ectoplasm or physical energies to create a voice box, or partially materialize their own vocal organs to speak to us in a direct way, either direct voice or independent voice phenomena. Yeah. And that's very rare nowadays. So supposing you wanted to talk through me, or to control my hand to write or to paint, or even to control both my hands to play the piano. There have been musical control mediums, such as Rosemary Brown, Geraldine Cummins, a control medium for writing, Jose Madrado for painting. Now, I'm a control medium for healing and or speaking, or even both at the same time. What they want to try and do is control my mind, and through my mind, my body. If I wanted to stand up now and leave this room, what would be the first thing I do? I don't just stand up. I think about it. I think, oh, I've had enough of Martin this morning. I want to leave the room. I'm going to be really rude and walk out. So I have the thought, and then I make a decision. Stand up and walk out. But I don't then think, okay, how am I going to stand up? How do I control my muscles? How do I move my body forward, push back on my chair? How do I then get some power and tension into my leg muscles and shift my body weight, stand up, etc.? If you think about it, how do you walk? You don't know consciously. Because we make a conscious decision to do something, but we then delegate the actual mechanics of doing it to a subconscious level of our mind. So, if an external intelligence wanted to stand me up and walk me out the room or to speak to you now, they would have to do it in exactly the same way I do it. They have to learn first to subdue the conscious level of my mind so they can have the thoughts, bring their thoughts forward and express them through the subconscious, controlling the speech faculties, the mouth, the breathing, the expelling of air, and making the words. But first and foremost, my mind right now is too active. They couldn't control me now and speak to you because I am using these faculties.
Yeah.
So the first job is to subdue my consciousness to reduce my use of my physical faculties. And the tool that they use for that is trance. Trance, therefore, is the tool to enable the objective. So therefore, the title Trance Mediumship is inaccurate and misleading. And going back to the early days of modern spiritualism, the 19th century, and they didn't use the title so much because it was Control Mediumship. They understood it better. But it's a modern term that's in use today. So if we said we're going to talk about Control Mediumship, most people don't understand it. One thing we're trying to do now through the education within the SNU is to bring back these titles. And only at a recent, this will bore people to death now, a GPC meeting, we're rewriting the schedules to a certain bylaw, and we're talking about the spirit-controlled altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Whereas previously talked about the altered state of consciousness. Well, isn't sleep an altered state of consciousness?
Yeah.
But in that particular bylaw, it's talking about trance healing in the altered state of consciousness. Sorry, healing in the altered state of consciousness. So does that mean healing whilst we're asleep in a somnambulistic state? No, it doesn't. So we're trying to be far more descriptive and more accurate with our language. The spirit-controlled altered state of consciousness tells you exactly what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're trying to re-educate the movement now into using words very carefully and clearly. Communication mediumship or communicating mediumship, healing mediumship, control mediumship.
Yeah.
That makes sense to you?
Yeah, is that because, I mean, I'm also a tutor at the Arthur Findlay College, and a lot of people do come there and you say, and you have to be careful how you say things, because a lot of people say trance. And I often say, I use a similar analogy to your own, where you can be driving down the road and all of a sudden you arrive at your destination. How did I get here? You've been in that altered state. And I often use that as an example. It isn't trance. You know, trance is the tool that you're talking about, because a trance you can go into just, I mean, we've got an Aborigine plate on the wall here. I can stare at that and go into a trance. But it isn't mediumship. And
it becomes scrying, that does.
It's one of the things that I've tried to get out of people. That isn't the mediumship. Stop calling it trance, you know. It isn't trance.
Well, to be as accurate as possible, you can say, yes, it is trance. Yeah. It's not control.
That's right.
So you can say, yes, you can go into a trance state in a variety of ways. You can stare at your Aboriginal plate and go into an altered state of consciousness, which could be a trance state.
Trance state.
But it's not mediumship.
No.
You're sat there on your own in an altered state of consciousness, and it would effectively be a self-induced altered state. You're using the method of staring at an object. You could stare into a very expensive crystal ball. You could stare into a very cheap bowl of water. It does exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
By that fixation onto an object, the mind moves into an altered state. But that's not what we want with mediumship. The object is to allow an intelligence, an external intelligence, one that we believe is someone who has died, and has, of course, survived death, because we believe everyone survives. We want to allow that intelligence to have control of us, to express either their thoughts or an ability, which should be superior to that of the medium, to express them through, in effect, to borrow for a short period of time the medium's physical body.
Yes.
Trance is never the object.
No.
Controlling the medium becomes the object. And when we start thinking about it that way, a lot of these people who think they're trance mediums, well, they might be in a trance state, but they're not performing any mediumistic act. And if we start thinking about it more accurately as control mediumship, we can say to a student, yes, actually, you're in a trance state. However, there's no one controlling you, so what's the point?
Yeah.
So we can think of it in this sense. We remove the confusion of people who are in trance with no control, which is no use, from people who are in trance and being controlled, which is what we want.
Yeah. Then what would you say to these people who are afraid of control? Because, you know, again, I've been to the college, I've taught overseas, and a lot of them don't like the word control. And so to reduce the fear of it, I always explain it in a similar way that you've done. I always say, see it as a form of cooperation.
Yes.
Cooperating with the spirit world. And the question I want to move on to is where there's a lot of contradiction. You see, I know that yourself, I've watched you and myself, I've stood up in the trance state. When I'm doing spiritual healing like yourself, I can see the doctors. I can't see it, but I'm aware that the doctors are moving and expressing their own personality. But there's those people who say that that's wasting the energy. And yet I've heard that, I mean, a good friend of yours and mine, Judith, used to walk around in the circle. Gordon Higginson used to walk down the steps off the platform of his church and walk around in the trance state and come back and sit down. So what do you say to those people who doubt that level of control?
Okay. Firstly, to answer the question, is it a waste of energy? It's a completely different energy.
Yeah.
I don't believe the spirit world is frivolous and waste anything. What they're doing is they're demonstrating a superior ability. They're demonstrating a level of control and a faculty the medium does not have in their normal state of consciousness. Effectively, they're providing evidence of their presence. Yeah. Is it possible for you or I to keep our eyes closed and walk around a room where, let's just take the main lecture room at Stansted, quite a large room, and I'm going to give you a real example. You know what the small tea light candles are, these little candles. Yeah. You buy a pack of 100. On this particular occasion, I know there was 100 of those on the floor because I lit them all. It was a brand new pack of 100 and they were spread out like a minefield. We had about 80 students sat in a big circle all around. It was the closing ceremony. Jackson was controlling Judith, and as always, he stands up and started talking to the audience. In the middle of the room, the only lighting in the room was 100 little tea light candles. And whilst he was talking, Judith stroke Jackson walked and navigated through all of this minefield of candles without any hesitation, without opening her physical eyes.
Yes.
And when he got towards the far side, in whatever he was referring to, I can't remember the context, but he said something just like that light that went out behind me. One candle had gone out of 100, and her eyes were closed. How could Judith have known that?
Yes.
And then he turns around and walks all the way back and sits through it all and sits back in the same chair. No error, no hesitation, and eyes never opened. Why would he bother doing that? He's not showing off. He's demonstrating a presence and a superior ability the medium does not possess in the normal state of consciousness.
No, no. Wonderful.
It's not wasting energy at all. It's proving a point.
Yes. I mean, I saw one once, a trance demonstration where the trance medium was walking inside the circle. It was quite a large circle, and somebody stuck the leg out, which is foolish. But the medium stepped over the leg, and when they sat back down, the control said, the person who stuck the leg out, do you realise you could have hurt my medium had he not been under my control? Words to that effect. Mm. So again, just showing the superior intelligence.
Yeah. And the reason why it's important is in fact, I believe it was you and I several years ago when we were devising the assessing course, yeah. We had to define exactly what it is we're looking for each award. And when we're trying to define the requirement, if there was a trance diploma, we came up with the following phrase. What is it we're looking for? The primary objective is we're looking for a demonstration of either a superior knowledge or ability the medium does not possess in their normal state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I do, yes.
Now, that has stuck in my mind ever since, because it holds good today.
Yeah, it certainly does. And
A super.
we're resurrecting that award within the SNU. So perhaps when we set the task for people to think of, and you could drop that hint in and we'll get it recognised this time.
So that demonstration of Jackson's control over Judith, walking through the candle minefield, that was a demonstration of a superior ability the medium does not possess. So it wasn't a waste of energy, it was proving the control.
Yeah, totally accept that explanation. So we're coming to the end, Stephen, and this is the second question that I've asked everybody, or all the mediums. I was even asked the question myself when Stephanie interviewed me. If there's some advice you would give to somebody who's looking to come into this, either as a trance medium or just into mediumship in general, any of the disciplines, what advice would you give them?
The advice I'd give is actually very clear. It's also answering a point you raised earlier, which I have failed to answer so far, and that's on the subject of the word fear. I've been opening my mind up to the spirit world since that Wednesday evening in October of 1971, and it's now June of 2020. So this October, that's 49 years.
Yeah. Various
aspects, as a physical medium, as a mental medium, healing medium, all aspects. Through personal experience, and I don't know how many mediums I've witnessed, hundreds at the very least, possibly, I don't know if it's thousands, but certainly hundreds of mediums. I cannot think of a single instance where the spirit world has given me any cause to fear them. So what I'm saying is not based on what I've read, it's not based on what anyone's taught me, it's based on nearly 49 years of personal experience. They have never given me any cause to fear.
Yeah.
That's my message to everyone.
That's a good point to end on, because it's, and I know you and I think the same over some of these foolish things that go around, but it's so hard to convince people that there's nothing bad in mediumship. You know, why would something so beautiful have a dark side to it, is my way of thinking. But I want to touch on something you said, because one of the books you had printed I've read recently, which was the story of J.J. Thomas. And I've read it twice, it's so interesting. But the similarities between how he came into it, he was in the RAF, he'd gone out one night with two friends. They said, "Oh, Luke, let's go and see the spooks," you know, joking with him. And that's how his journey started.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that earlier in the interview, and it's just came back. Something's inspired me to, say the similarities between you and J.J. Thomas, and both of you healing mediums as well.
But you also know the other similarity.
I do, but I'm sure you'd like to explain it to the people.
The spirit control, or one of the main spirit control for Thomas, was Robert Koch.
Yeah.
Who also happens to be the main spirit control for myself when it comes to healing.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on, and this interview is so interesting, but we have got to bring it to an end. But I've always believed that, why would a guy who's been so helpful just and say, "Oh, I've got to retire now because my medium's up here with me, I've got to retire now," when they've done such wonderful work? And I think that's another thing people need to keep their minds open to, that there's so much knowledge in the spirit world that they need to keep pushing the boundaries of their own mediumship, therefore pushing the boundaries of spiritualism, and who knows where the future lies with mediumship.
Now, as far as I can determine, Thomas was the first medium that Robert worked with, J.J. Thomas. I'm his third. Yeah. And it's a very interesting succession, the way you look at it. And also, it's very interesting the way it's been documented and the way the information came to me. This isn't something I thought about and made up in my own mind. I'd never heard of Robert Koch or Thomas. It was given to me through third parties. But when Thomas died, Robert started working with a patient of Thomas's called Tom Pilgrim.
Yeah.
When Robert became the control for myself in the early 90s, Tom Pilgrim was, I think I'm right in saying, round about 93 or 94 years old and had retired and did pass the spirit shortly after. So you can see this one spirit intelligence working with 3 mediums consecutively over a very long period of time. Yeah. So as you say, why would he think, well, that's it now, I'm done with Thomas, I can have some time off, when they can still come in and help us? Yeah.
I can't just imagine all these old guys just sitting there with their legs crossed, smoking pipes, you know, say, arguing about who had the best medium.
Sitting around like we do in the British Legion with our war stories. Pull up a sandbag, mate, and tell us your war stories. Oh, I worked with Thomas. Oh, that's nothing. I worked with Gordon Higginson.
Yeah. And Gordon sitting there going, oh, no, you didn't. Stephen, it's been lovely. And I'm sure you've brought something for people to really think about, and change the way of thinking. And hopefully with all the hard work you're doing with GPC and the Education Committee, this will help in some way to bring that change in thought and thinking about, is it trance mediumship or control mediumship? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been on the couch with me, Martin Coculiffe, and my guest today, Minister Stephen Upton. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.